All right, greetings everybody and welcome to the 9th PLP Pathways webinar of the year. This evening we'll be talking about transitions and how folks are helping their students transition into the next life and learning stage. And as we head into the end of the year here, my name is Don Taylor. I teach at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and I'm a co-director of the PLP Pathways organization. And I'd like to let the other panel members introduce themselves. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Maura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach for Lamoille South Supervisory Union.
Lindsay?
She froze. I'm Allison Gothier. I teach at U32 High School Science.
Okay, and hopefully Lindsay will unfreeze there and she'll come back to us. So as I mentioned, we're talking about transitions and what we're doing with our students for the end of the year for like the next stage. And one of the big issues that I was thinking about was sort of when do people start the transition? When do people start thinking about moving into either next year or the next grade or the next part of their program? And I guess I'd like to hear from Maura. Maura, maybe start us out. What do you see teachers doing in terms of their transition and when they start that process?
Yeah, so, I think different buildings and different structures within our schools, they have slightly different experiences with the transitions, but I can talk about sort of my experience at the middle level. I know we started talking about transitions towards the end of the winter. So February and March, really starting to think about how do we build meaningful experiences for our 8th graders who are going into 9th grade. And so, starting with things like having the guidance counselors come in and doing TA experiences, having small groups shadow, having them select their courses, and then have time for them to look at their new schedules and ask questions of the guidance counselors, and then having them go and meet their new TA. And then also thinking about how do we have the PLP play a role in that. And so that does take some really intentional planning and collaboration between them, both the middle level and the high school. I know we have our 4th graders within Morristown. We have our 4th graders going to 5th grade. And so we have some 5th graders doing some projects, creating some videos for the 4th graders to help them understand sort of what it's like to be a 5th grader in the middle school. In our Stowe building, I think they had their parent meeting a few weeks ago, starting to talk about it with the parents. So it's happening all different places, but the key element is being really planful about these transitions to really address sort of all of the needs, because we do have some structural new needs. Kids need to know where classrooms are located, but we also have to be thoughtful about how do we honor individual students in transitions. How do we think about student social emotional needs in transitions? How do we help parents with these transitions? Because yes, their student now is going to a different school, but there's a lot of pieces that go into that for a family. And so really being thoughtful about meeting those needs. So the planning does need to start kind of early.
So I just had a quick question before we hear from Lindsay and Allison. Do you think that any of those activities are any of those activities embedded or integrated into the curriculum? So for example, making the movie about 5th grade, is it possible that those movies about, 4th graders, could those 5th grade produced movies, are those integrated into the curriculum, or is it an extra add-on that folks have to do, or maybe just talk more a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact structure of what that is. I think that might be within what's called opportunity time, which is sort of, we have flex time and opportunity time. And I think that's a communication focus during opportunity time. I'm not sure if it's embedded within humanities curriculum, but I do think that those things could fit very easily, thinking about some of those transferable skills, really having that be a part of the curriculum for different courses.
All right, great. Maura, sorry, Lindsay, do you want to talk to us about the transitions?
Yeah, sorry, I lost I don't know where it went.
No problem.
So transitions for right now, I'm on a looping team, so really, and I have 7th grade that are going to loop until 8th grade. But in general, in the school, the 8th graders are beginning. They had started their transition process, I believe, in January or February with the first visits and orientations to the high school, and then thinking about their coursework and what their pathway might look like next year. And then a number of different opportunities for visits, both having people come here to talk about extracurricular activities and extra opportunities at the high school, music programs, and then I think they're going back to the high school soon for another visit day. So there's a lot of transitional activities that happen for the 8th graders right now. And then I don't exactly know what's happening from 5th to 6th. I used to have a little more knowledge of that, but typically the peer leaders that I've worked with have gone over to the sending school to do some facilitated workshops with the 5th graders to talk about 6th grade life and middle school life and help them with the transition.
Got it. Allison?
Sure, we have a few transitions. So we're 7 through 12. So we have the 6 to 7 transition that happens and culminates with Unity Day, where all the students come here. Pretty typical thing that schools do, and many schools become one. Here, U32, 5 different sending schools. And then the 8th to 9th transition I'm more a part of. So we've built into the professional development time cross-team, cross-core to team collaboration and discussion. So we actually just had that yesterday. That was really meaningful for the 9th grade team to meet with the 10th grade team and just talk more. Like last year we talked about specific students, but this year we took a more theme-based, like holistic approach. Like, what is this class like? What activities are really good for them as a whole group? And I think that to me was more beneficial because it was a chance to also talk about proficiency-based learning and the Google sites, their personalized Google sites, and then how to kind of keep that momentum going with both those things. So I found those discussions really helpful in terms of like consistent expectations and just the themes of the class transitioning up.
So I'm just wondering, I'm thinking about this. It always seems, at least from my experience, that the transitions, I don't think that I've been as thoughtful as I could or should be about this. We have, it's pretty traditional where the high school guidance counselors come over, before the March or February-March break and talk to our students about it. But, I'm wondering, who are obviously it's the students we need to really be concerned with, but also communicating to the families. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if it just seems like we could have such a more robust program or way of doing this with the PLPs. And even in a small district like Montpelier, it seems like we're still sort of dropping off the 8th graders and not like supporting or bridging them into their opportunities for next year. And as I also mentioned to Maura, I'm wondering if some of these opportunities can't be integrated into our curriculum. So for example, those 5th graders, if they're making a movie about what it's like to be a 5th grader that they're showing to the 4th graders, that hits so many different pieces of a literacy program and also a communication and project-based learning. And I guess I'm just kind of wondering what we could be doing to find examples of those bridges and maybe be publishing or publicizing those so that people start to really think about that transition a little bit. As part of the transition too, I know that people have rituals or ceremonies or things that they have their kids go through at the end of the year. And I'm just wondering what happens at your school to sort of signify this move from one part of the kids' education to the other. And maybe we can start with Allison and talk about some of the events that are happening there.
Sure. Just traditionally, what happens every year is the award ceremony and move-up day, where students go through their whole new schedule, and maybe students from a different sending school like Orange or Orange or Washington would see their new teachers for the first time. And something that we're doing this year as a 9th grade team for the first time is this celebration of learning. So the goal is to merge personalization, their sites with their proficiencies. So they have a panel of people that they will be with. It's a one-day all in-school field trip, and they will, through their media of their Google site, share 12 minutes of, I mean, we're working with them to make an outline for each of them specialized, but the goal is artifacts of proficiency combined with your goals, maybe goals you have for next year, progress made on goals this year. So that's something I will have more to tell you about in June in terms of just, what works well about that.
Okay, Lindsay, what ceremonies or rituals do you have to start thinking about the end of the year?
Well, I'm in a kind of in a place where I'm not dealing with transitions on really either end because I just have 7th graders, but the 8th graders currently are on their trip they go to Washington D.C. every spring, so they're currently on that trip. They left they're there Wednesday through Saturday essentially, and that's a rite of passage for them. And then there's the 8th grade. We have a graduation evening where there's kind of a graduation ceremony as they leave this building and transition into the next building. But I did want to say back to your point from before, because I don't have as much to add about this question, is that when we're thinking about transitions, I mean, that's a huge part of middle grades philosophy. If you're really in a school that practices middle grades philosophy, and it doesn't look like a junior high or a little high school. One of the things I was thinking about with the PLP is like a way to make the transition so much less anxiety producing and so much less like, oh my gosh, now I'm going off to the big high school, is this idea of flexible pathways and what that could look like for our middle level learners and accessing, I mean, we have an incredible high school that has an incredible career technology. TTE is incredible. So like if they had more opportunities throughout their time here to use that as part of their learning, their campus and their learning, then maybe it wouldn't be such a huge shock to the system.
So I'm just brainstorming here, and I'm wondering if we could have a flexible pathway micro-credentialing badge sort of thing for the transition, right? So where you had, to make sure that you're transitioning, you have to meet with your guidance counselor. You had to do a shadow of a half day and maybe meet some of your teachers, where you had to do some exploration of the courses. And I'm wondering, it sounds a little ridiculous, I guess, but as a flexible pathway, you could have this exploration piece where, these are the things that we believe you should do to make sure that your transition is successful, and then have kids be able to do that sort of independently. And maybe attend a meeting of a club, and then you can get you could get a badge, right? A micro-credential in your future. And then the kids could be writing about that and blogging about it or posting about that experience. And I'm also wondering if that might, if we could have mentors doing that, so that part of the flexible pathways thing could have the 9th graders could be demonstrating leadership and citizenship by maybe leading some of these kids around. And I don't know, it's just an idea, because it does feel like for me that we don't make that bridge very strong or robust. And I just feel like there's a lot of kids who are stressed out about high school, and they don't say, hey, Mr. Taylor, I'm stressed out. But you see behaviors and dispositions towards the end of the year that lead you to believe that they're going through a lot of obviously social and emotional, hey, what's going to happen to me, sort of things. Maura, how about you?
One of the shifts that historically at People's Academy middle level that was made, we always would do a step-up day where the students would go and they'd meet their new TA, or maybe go through a rotation and meet all their new teachers. And one of the changes that we made was to do a sort of celebration of learning, where the students would have their PLPs, and their TA teacher from the next year would come and meet with them and come around, and we'd oftentimes invite families or community members to come in and also see the PLPs and the work that the students did. And it would be, different teams would structure it differently, but I know last year it was really a focus on evidence of students' work towards meeting proficiencies, as well as their personal and academic goals. And, you always want more time. Like, that was one of the challenges. I think when I reflect on the success of student-led conferences, it gives such a space for students to really be center, and you have that time to pause and really listen and ask questions. And I would say that structure isn't necessarily there. So if I was to say something to improve on, would be to create more time for that reflection or that one-on-one meeting. But it does really nicely give an audience for students with their portfolio. And then you kind of get to sense from the students who they are, the students that you'll have the next year. I liked how Allison was saying that this year, when her team was meeting with the 10th grade team, last year was focused on kids, and maybe going through the roster of kids, or this is what you need to know about this class, and shifting that to now having a slightly different conversation. And my hope is that instead of maybe teacher to teacher talking about kids, we're now learning about kids from them and using the portfolio as a way for us to really understand the learners that we'll be getting the next year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, is maybe, the celebration of learning should be directed not backwards, but forwards, so that we typically don't get our team, they sort of keep it a big secret, I would say, who's going to be on your team until right at the end of the year, so that there's not a lot of conflustration about who's going to be with who. But maybe we should be thinking about that celebration of learning. Okay, I would love to meet with the kids who I'm having in next year and look at their PLP. If I did that in June, that would really help my planning, right? And my vision for what the next year would look like, and kind of the strengths that I would have and what kids were hoping for. And I think that's another really interesting idea about including those teachers in it. And I just also want to point out, or a concern that I have, is how are we communicating this to all parents, not just the parents who are super invested and who are kind of really aware and involved in the PTO, but how are we helping to transition families maybe who are, English is their second language, or who maybe have just moved here, or who might not really understand the system or how it works. And so I don't know if you guys are doing anything for the families, and if you are, can you just, maybe speak to that?
I think for me, the best practice in the past has been finding that advocate in the school that is the connection with the family. So whether that's the guidance counselor or their TA, right, their advisor that they're always meeting with, that's my always go-to first, just to hear maybe there's to go about it in this mannerism, to talk to that family is where I usually start, John.
Yeah. Lindsay, what do you think?
Well, I'm from transition, but maybe along the same lines. I mean, traditionally when I was, before this year, when I was working with the Edge Academy, we always ended our year with, we had 2 family gatherings beyond just our student-led conferences that were individualized. We had our peek through the window and our project fair. And the project fair was at the end of the year and was a potluck. And we always got almost 100% attendance from all families, which is very hard to do in these days that are super busy for every family, and people work at various times. And so bringing people together for a meal, and then with the idea being that it's their child that's sharing their learning and demonstrating their growth throughout the year, and then looking towards the next year, because we would have kids for multiple years, was always for me the best wrap-up, celebration, transition piece, because we always had parents, and then we could also share information too, because we had a full audience. They felt supported. It was celebrating their child, and it was on positive terms. So if we wanted to share transition information, we had an engaged audience at that time.
And about when did you do that? Was that towards the end of May? Was that in June? Like, what's the?
So peek through the window was always good because that was like mid-year, and so that was like right when our 8th graders started transitioning. As far as starting to think ahead towards like what life's going to be like next year. So we could share information at that point, but we always did this during the last week of school, which was a really nice celebration and a way to keep kids super engaged in, because they were really excited for the project there. It was a big event. It was always a potluck. We always had performances because some of their projects involved, performances in some way. Then we would come back to our space and the kids would share and celebrate. And it was a really nice end of the year experience.
And so here's another, I guess, question I have. Were all the teams doing that, or was that something that was unique to the Edge?
Unique to the Edge.
Oh, and did that cause any, friction, or did that cause any? Because one of the things, I mean, that's a hard question, right? But it's one of those deals where, do we propose that everybody does that, or do we propose that teams are doing it? Just because if one team does it, how does that look to the community and what have you?
I agree. I mean, I think that it would have been looked more highly upon if everyone, that was just an expectation, is that we engage kids through, with their personalized learning plans, through, these personalized project work, and that throughout the year there are times where you gather as a community to share. I think it's still nice to have it team-based because that's the beauty of middle school, is like a small community, but if it's an expectation across the school that teams are having these experiences and they can kind of make them their own so that it has their own team flavor to it. But I think it'd be more accepted. I mean, our families always are super appreciative and super excited. I mean, I just have been doing some interviews with past students that are from 8th grade into like mid-college years for a project that I'm doing. And I've talked to their families as well, their parents, and it's really interesting to see what they remember about their experience, and the most engaging experiences were the project fairs and the times where we were together as a community, like when we went for our yearly team building experience to Holbert Outdoor Center. Those were the highlights that they, even 20-plus-year-olds still remember, and so, and the families too. And just talking to a family the other night, some parents of a former student, they were saying, gosh, I remember thinking about these two boys that they were never going to get their project together when I was at Peek Through the Window. And at the end of the year, they were saying, I'm still so amazed. I call them the dog park kids because they organized and went to the town and advocated to have a dog park and went through all the, went to the select board and the planning commission. And she says they'll never forget that. So even not just like joy about their own child, but like just changing the narrative that we see about, about their peers as well.
Now, just a real quick follow-up question. You mentioned interviewing people who are on the Edge who are in college, right? Which is, 8-9 years ago. But do you always collect data from your kids, or do you go back and collect data from kids who are in the 9th grade or the 8th grade about their experience in your program? Is that something you do regularly? And maybe to all the folks on the panel, how are you collecting data at the end of the year where you're getting sort of exit surveys or whatnot? And why would teachers want to collect that data? And what do you recommend in order to do it effectively? And we can start with Maura and just maybe talk about that data collection about programs.
I think, and we touched on this, Don and I, when we did the pre-recorded segment, but it's so important that we honor student voice in the work that we're doing. And one of the ways that we can do that through the process of the school year is getting feedback from kids that we can use to inform our instruction or inform our planning or how, we go about things within our classroom. And it's also so important that we get feedback before students leave at the end of the year. And then be really intentional about creating some reflective space for either your teaching team or you as an individual to really think about not only your year, but the experience of the students that you had, so that as you're thinking about planning for next year, you can help to strengthen your own programming. And I think it's even more important when you're as important, but really important when you are looping with kids, knowing that you'll have these students again the following year. And so, you know, thinking about getting feedback about how you structure your classroom, or what are some of the changes that they would like to see within the class, really bringing in some of that ownership. And I also think, and this is kind of an aside, but as teachers, we're always wondering how we're doing. Like, that's one of those things, like, am I doing this right? Am I on the right track? And so by engaging with students and getting feedback from students, it can really help us know how we're doing as a practitioner. And so I just think it's a really important practice, and doing that through either maybe you have a community meeting where you do a circle and you're talking about getting some of that feedback. Maybe it's through Google survey, maybe it's through some questions, but really just thinking about how are we engaging with kids, and then also using it to be reflective and make changes.
Okay, Allison.
I just had, this is just what happens with webinar. I just had this great, well, we're obviously going to get feedback about the celebration of learning to see if they thought that was a good use of their time, if that was the best way to show that personalization and their proficiencies on this year. But also just thinking about one of the future goals next year for our school is having the beginning of the school year look really different. So if we survey our ninth graders now and ask them, what was difficult about your transition? What went well about ninth grade? What do you wish like the first few weeks would have looked like to set you up for success? And if we use that data now, that can better inform how we start the year off next year. But yeah, so that was just my really quick idea, but I really appreciate what you were saying more, that the student voice as part of the curriculum and building it over time. And I would just advocate that for me, the end of the semester and the end of the year is too late. Like I need more feedback like in the moment. So even just like at the end of the unit or just trying a new like intervention or instruction, Google Form is just it facilitates that way to get that feedback quickly to know if it's working right in the moment.
And I think, not just to jump in before Lindsay too, I think teachers who are really reflective tend to create classroom cultures where students feel like they can voice their feedback and opinion at any time and say, maybe this isn't working for me, or, advocating for themselves. And so it really is throughout the process. You could be in the middle of something and a kid could say, actually, do you think we could try this? And it always benefits all the learners and you as a teacher. It's so inspiring when kids are advocating for themselves. And so I think part of it is to building that culture.
Before Lindsay gets going, I also just had an idea here. Is this something though that should be a teacher's job, is to kind of figure out how the transition went from 8th to 9th grade? Or is this something that we should play more of a role as a teacher leader, where we're putting upwards pressure on the administration to be surveying all 9th graders? Because I know what happens in the past when I've asked 9th graders, I've sent them surveys, the response rate has been fairly low. Kids either don't check email or whatnot. And I'm wondering if this is something that we should be advocating upwards and saying to the high school principal, what we'd really like to know is how our 9th graders transitioned. Is this something that you could do system-wide, so that, and then give that data back to us? And can you structure your instruments so that not only will we get data about the whole 9th grade, but will we get data maybe about if we do in fact have teams doing using different structures, that what worked and what didn't work, or if a specific technique is really helping improve family community relations. So just thinking about, is this not that we couldn't do it as teachers, but when we do, it becomes more individualized, and maybe making it systemic and advocating for principals to do this makes more sense, so that we can have sort of uniform data collection that would help all teachers. Sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just remembered a couple of other pieces that I think after listening to everyone, but with Allison's celebration of learning, one of the things that we always did as far as feedback, both during the project, the peek through the window mid-year, and then the project fair, which is like our celebration of learning, we always had anybody who came to hear the presentation, like their family members or friends or other peers, they would have a feedback form for them, and looking at the transferable skills, and also like a rubric or learning targets, and then but really more just questions and feedback. So that was really useful for the folks that were presenting in regards to feedback, and especially having your family be able to provide some feedback or have a sit and have a conversation. The other thing was, I forgot to mention that we always had, when I was with the Edge, we always had high schoolers, usually freshmen, sometimes sophomores, because they'd want to come back. One year we had all grade levels represented, come back to the Edge around January, February to talk with our 8th graders about the transition, especially because we were a team that really embraced project-based learning and negotiated curriculum and provided a lot of space for student-centered learning. There was always a lot of questions about what will happen when I get to high school. So we always had high schoolers come back and have a dialogue with our 8th graders, and that was incredibly powerful. And I feel like that I totally forgot about that, but that was the one piece that really alleviated a lot of concerns for them. They got to hear straight from their peers they actually had just been learning with the year before, since we were multi-age. And then finally, when Allison was talking about changing up the beginning of the school year, many years ago at my school, we did something that I always thought was quite interesting, and also I would have loved to see it continue to see how it grew. But we did the first 3 days of school, because we always started on a 3-day week, were in-service days for kids, and it became a day where these days where they were like, we have to do in service, right? And it should be meaningful and exciting and get you prepared for the year. So we did in-service days for the kids, and they did a lot of learning style inventories and group activities and community activities, and it was kind of different levels, but so connected to, this was before Act 77, but so connected to beginning stages of a PLP. And then it really set the tone for the year as far as who are we as a community, and also gave them a sense of like, what do teachers do when they go for in-service? What is that meaningful learning that's setting the stage for the year? So just wanted to mention that. I always thought that was a really cool idea.
And that would just help the transition so much. Like if you think about a student who's new, because we have kids who transition at different grade levels, but we also have kids who come into schools who maybe are coming in the middle of middle school, and so it just resets the community.
Totally. Yeah,
that's a great idea.
Year. This was like 10 or 11 years ago we did it, and I always was like, we should do that again. That was so amazing. Maybe we did it for 2 years. And I always thought it was so powerful when it was school-wide. It's different than when it's team, teams can do their own thing, and we always did stuff like that. But when it was the whole school culture, bought into this idea of the first 3 days being in service for kids, it was pretty amazing.
So Lindsay, going off what Dawn was saying, do you remember if that was school? Yeah, that was like, who made the decision about
school-wide?
Right. Was that
leadership
by teachers? Like the teachers said, we want this? Or it was more like leadership said, and then everyone did it?
It was like, so at that point in time, we were, engaged in really like collaborative discussions around how we wanted to start our year and build community and create a culture and climate of kindness and respect. And this idea became a brainstorm. And then there was a group of us that met over the summer who were really invested in it and spent, I think, had some working days, maybe a few days planning it all out. It wasn't just like, let's just have, so there was some real intentional thought put into it, but it came from a collaborative discussion on how do we start the year differently? Because we kind of just throw kids right back into the the thing that's schooling, and so why don't we try to begin in a different way that sets a tone for the year, hopefully to engage them in a different way, get them started in in the right way.
And then how do you come back to that space though? So it's like you have these 3 amazing days where people feel super empowered and like their voice is heard. And then like I can just imagine the high school, it's like, okay, and it's the day 4, 8, 10, go to physics, right? Or like, right. So how do you come back?
Also, it's like they might go like have a shortened schedule, like by like the second or third day, like really mini. So they're meeting if in a high school setting where they're meeting all their teachers and getting to know them. But those teachers are engaging in the same activities that everyone is, like, so maybe when they go to this time period, they're doing a kaleidoscope learning style inventory, or when they go here, they're doing an engineering task to build collaborative skills or something. So they're still like going to those places and connecting, but connecting in a way different way than like handing out a syllabus and being like, this is our year, folks, or our semester, and let's get going. So I just always thought that was a really amazing way to start. I always had hoped that as a school we'd go back to that as a whole school culture.
Okay, can I say something? I was on mute there, which was a good thing. So Lindsay, think about this. What happens if you started the school year, and maybe you could call them a camp, right? You had your summer camp where you came in and you taught kids about the structures that you would want to have in place, right? Like a restorative circle. So you could, okay, this is a restorative circle. This is something you need to get used to. We're going to practice it today. And then the kids went and they said, this is what your PLP eventually is going to look like. You can, we'll be focusing. And here's what you could do. You could have, and bear with me here, you could have 3 camps across the course of the year. The first camp would be around identity of the learner and building community and relationships. So you could have like restorative circle. You could have, this is going to be your PLP. You could meet your teachers. This is common language you're going to hear around digital citizenship. You could have like a tech camp. This is how you use Google Classroom. These are all the common things that we're going to run you through and help you with in a fun way at the beginning of the school year so that we get to know you better. You get to know us better. Here's the common language. So language and structures, right? And then you could also have, you end that day with like a barbecue or whatever for families to come in, meet the teachers. Everybody knows everybody. You're on a good start, right? It's that student in-service or, student camp around identity. But then what if we talk about this all the time where we start out the year with really hardcore on digital citizenship and then it kind of fades away. But maybe in January and February, you have your winter camp, and your winter camp is about growth and reflection. And that growth and reflection is the peek through the window. You revisit with the families. You have, 2 days, non-traditional days at school where you revisit, hey, this is what we're seeing with digital citizenship. Do we have to revisit this? And then maybe your circles deal with issues that are coming up in the school year. Maybe, we talked about restorative justice. And here, these are things that we're seeing in the school year, and we want to address those now so that you build off that summer camp. And then your final one is around the transformation stage of the personal learning framework, around transitions and around the move to the next life and learning stage. That happens in June, where you have that family celebration of learning. And again, it's sort of school-wide, and you're advocating for where are we now? What goals do we have? And then you could invite the high school to that and kind of have a much more, that would be one of those bridges. Just an idea, but that sort of that camp attitude where here's where we're starting, here's where we're checking in, and here's where we're kind of ending.
I just have one little thing when you said that I want to add on.
Yeah.
To strengthen that youth adult partnership piece. And I just thought when you said camp, how cool would it be if students elected to come to a camp in August to become trained facilitators, and they got stipend, or something, for coming. Like we get stipend for coming and doing summer planning, and then they were the ones with adult partners doing these camps throughout the year. So whether you call them camp or in service, there was a training camp in the summer, summer camp. That's fun, but also and they were stipend or, you know, whatever, compensated for their time in some way. And then it was this youth team that was really, how much, so much more buy-in too. And so the teachers being like, now we're going to do this fun activity.
If it's, you mean students who just graduated from that school? Like student leaders?
Like current students. Like who wants to be part of the planning camp team and come for a week? It'll be fun. We'll get some preemies, have some pizza, do some planning. You can get some compensation. And what better way to launch a school year than with you all leading the way?
So check this out, Lindsay. That's a great idea. And you have all these like levels there of leadership, and kids could be getting credit, right? Like flexible pathways credit. But the other thing that you could do in the February piece, we're talking about camps, right? You could make that your beginning of thinking about the transition. So in the February, you have all of your like people from actual camps coming in and saying, we want you young people to come here, right? Like the Young Hacks Academy, they come up, hey, we're going to have a Young Hacks right here in Montpelier or Buck Lake. So then you start, what you do is you have the kids not only checking in on where am I with my growth and learning, but then you actually say, look, you may want to think about this opportunity in the spring or in the summer. And you may want to think we could have people from CCV here. So it could be an introduction to flexible pathways in that sort of February to March timeframe. So kids, and it would give kids juice too about, ooh, look where I could be going. And then that would be a great time to have those alumni come back and talk to the kids about the changes for high school. And I just want to mention something about that too. There's an article that I'll try and post. It's by this guy named David Yeager at the University of Texas. And he's got this article called Small Interventions. They're not a magic bullet, but he had kids in college, kids who were from groups that typically did not have success in college. Those that did wrote letters to freshmen who were in the same situation. And those kids had a huge improvement when they realized that people had gone through the same stress and anxiety that they had, and that they were able to say, hey, you know what? These people went through it. They made it. So can I. And that's one thing that alumni talk, you know, you could have the high school kids come back and say, hey, you know, this is what you need to be prepared for. And think how much that would help in terms of goal setting for the end of the year. I want to get to this camp. I want to apply for this scholarship. I want to do this reading so I can get ready for the high school. I don't know. It's a pretty good idea. It's a good idea, but
can I add to
the next level here?
So we did digital citizenship. I think we called it a boot camp, but we had our February break goes into the town meeting day week. And so we would then have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday back at school. And so there was 1 year, maybe 2 years that we paused then, and we did these sort of different rotations, and we did a focus on digital citizenship. This was before the PLP, but it made the transition back to school so nice because you're able to reteach your routines. You're doing something fun and engaging. You're honoring like it just helps kids get back into the mode of school, and it's totally at the right time. But the other piece is these things that we're talking about, they play, if we don't create spaces for them, they create interference anyways. And so if we're really intentional about creating time structures and spaces to address these pieces, it really allows students to go and teachers to go deeper in their thinking and in their learning. And so it's sort of the, you know, taking the time and the space to really lay the foundations for the deep learning, which I think is so, I think we need to patent this structure.
I got it all.
Wait. So the other thing too, though, Maura, is, you know, teachers might say, hey, I don't have time for that, right? But if you go back and you do that digital citizenship boot camp, I would bet that's going to eliminate, because, you know, January, February, March, and April, kids have forgotten what happened in September, right? So you're probably going to eliminate, just by reteaching it, you're going to eliminate having to deal with those issues as they're coming up. And again, if you went back and did the restorative circles and just reminded everybody about the community expectations and who we are and what we believe in, that would probably, it would take time, but it would probably, you know, you wouldn't have to be calling parents and talking about all these things that are going on. And you could, it would just be really, it'd be really interesting. And it would also, what it would also do is create equity for all students around the opportunities in the summer. And if you had the different flexible pathways or camps or any of that stuff coming into the school, it just creates so much more equity, especially when all the kids are exposed to it. And yeah, maybe we should keep talking about it. It's a good idea. It's a really good idea. So there you have it. That's our 9th webinar. Lindsay she's gazing off into the future, thinking about how she's gonna make this happen.
Right
now. So yeah, I mean, maybe we should try and create a structure like that and see if we could work it out, because it definitely, I mean, it makes sense to me. It seems to make sense to people.
Yeah.
Does anybody have, as we close here, does anybody have any thoughts about professional development opportunities or anything they want to tag as things that are keeping them going at this time of the year, or things they're looking forward to, just as we close, or perhaps some reminders to other teachers out there about opportunities? And we'll start with Allison and go right down the row.
Nothing, no new big PD for me. My grad degree is my PD from now until the end of July.
Right. Awesome. Lindsay?
Well, we have middle grades coming up at the end of June at Castleton. So that will be a great PD. And then I was just thinking, in connection to what we were just talking about, and I know maybe more, you know more about it, because I think all people's were part of the mindset, metacognition, and motivation, the M3 curriculum, which is and there's a middle school curriculum and there's a high school initiative, middle school initiative and high school initiative, but it's such a way to like fully optimize the personalized learning piece, and when we think about equity and youth and adult partnerships. So that's another professional development opportunity for teachers, but then engages youth as well. That works.
Okay, Maura?
I was just going to say, really looking forward to Middle Grades Institute. There's also the PLL conference, Partnerships in Literacy. And so they have their Summer Institute, and looking at that, there's some really nice offerings, sort of literacy focused, but also thinking about development of growth mindset and some of those different pieces. And so that's coming up as well. Yeah.
Good. I just know, yeah, Middle Grades Institute, the registration is still open for that. That's always, I always look, it's a lot of hard work, but I very much look forward to it. It's really refreshing. Also, just a shout out to Shelburne Farms. Right now, they are just, they have some amazing professional development. I was part of Climate Creative, which I'm excited about. I know Lindsay's part of the Cultivating Pathways to Sustainability. And they're just doing some really interesting stuff that is really aligned well with personalization. Also, the Roland Conference, which is in October, they're going to have, Ruha Benjamin, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, I think is her name, but she's a fantastic speaker talking about equity and empathy. Go ahead, Lindsay.
He was the speaker this year.
Yeah, I think she's coming back. I could be wrong on that, but I thought that she was coming back because she...
Amazing.
Right. And then just also, there's a sustainability PLC happening in Central Vermont. And yesterday we heard from, I think, Brian Boys and Peter Stratman about this application launchpad. And the term or the phrases that really got me interested was developing the architecture for project-based learning. And I just really like the way they're thinking about it and talking about it. And so keep your eye out for that. And, you know, another simple one is to just subscribe to the AOE weekly newsletter. There's a ton of stuff involved with that. So thank you very much, everybody. You guys are great. I hope you have the opportunity to enjoy the sunshine over the next couple of days. Again, I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Institute and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education for sponsoring this work. You can track us, follow us on Twitter, and also on the PLP Pathways YouTube channel. And we'll see you soon. Our next webinar is actually Thursday, June 7th, and that'll be our last webinar of our 3rd season. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. Bye now.
Bye.